have become a big deal in our society, but from stories that I hear, it wasn't always this way. From just a few generations ago, like even my mom's generation, but certainly the generation before them, my grandparents, weddings were simple affairs. You know, they often happened after a church service on a Sunday morning with a small reception in the church following that. And you know, but now weddings are huge, right? And wedding reception venues are such a big deal that they often have to be booked over a year in advance. Now, if we aren't that far off from a simpler time, just a few generations, what would a wedding have been like in ancient times? If they weren't as big as they are now, which seems to be fair, how did the host run out of wine at a smaller wedding? How poorly did they have to plan for that to happen? But weddings were different in Jesus' time. Weddings were a celebration of marriage, for sure, but they were also a family reunion and a reminder of what is important. So, okay, not much different than today, right? But going to a wedding often required several days of travel, and families would walk for several days to get to a wedding. So that meant that they would stay for several days. Weddings parties lasted for, like days, maybe even a week. So perhaps it isn't so odd that a host would run out of wine. I mean, who could control how long guests stayed or how much they drank? That'd be pretty tough to plan for. But even if we can see the possibility of this happening, it still isn't a good thing for this host. In fact, it's a major social blunder. Mary recognized this. She saw it as a big problem, and so she went to Jesus. She was really concerned for the honor of either the host or the family that is having this wedding. I don't know who would really be blamed for this blunder. It might have been the father, it might have been the host, it might have been the servants. Likely it would have been all of these, right? So Mary asked Jesus, would you please do something? And I love this part of the story, because this is like a glimpse into the relationship of a mother and a son that we get to be a part of. And Mary asked Jesus to do something for her, and Jesus, like a son would do, cops an attitude. Well, moms, have you ever had this happen? Right? He says, woman, what does that have to do with me? Leave me alone, right? I've been in that place before. I mean, I'm the one who has done it, right? But like a good son, Jesus does what his mother asked. And Mary knew that he would. Without even waiting or having another word with Jesus, she just turns to the servants and says, do what he says. So the servants bring some jars, the big jars. These are like 30-gallon jars. And Jesus has them filled with water, and he turns them into wine, which would be like 180 gallons of wine. That's a big party. Now in the next scene, we hear the head waiter questioning the groom. Like, what have you done? Why did you save the best wine? Most people serve that first while people can still taste things. You serve the bad wine when their taste buds go away, right? When people can't tell the difference anymore. There's a lot going on here. A lot going on. Now, the first thing that jumps out to me is that the servants are the only ones that really know what's going on here. They were the ones that put the water into the jars. They were the ones that delivered the wine. They knew that nothing happened in between, right? They witnessed the conversation between Mary and Jesus, and then they witnessed the conversation happening between the head waiter and the groom. So how do we get this story? Perhaps the servants tell us the whole thing. Now, in many stories, the servants are the ones that know what's going on, right? Think the help. The servants see what's going on behind the scenes, and stuff like this happens at many big events. Now, as a pastor, I get to be behind the scenes at many weddings, and I've seen the chaos that can ensue like right before a wedding starts. Like a zipper breaking 10 minutes before the start of a wedding. And I learned from a very wise wedding host that a good sewing kit is a vital piece of equipment for a wedding. A few quick stitches and no one's the wiser, right? In this case, the servants know what Jesus did. They're the ones that know what the real story is at the wedding. Now, the town is probably buzzing with gossip because that was likely to get out. You know, did you hear that the host almost ran out of wine? And well, until they found like the backup stash in the ceremonial washing jars. Now, who would keep the wine there? But they did. They found it. Aren't they lucky? Phew, that was close. But the servants knew. The servants who, I think the servants are who we want to be in this story. They're the ones that barely get mentioned. But they're the ones that get to witness Jesus in action. I'd rather be a servant at this wedding than an unknowing guest that is just too drunk to realize that this wine is better than the wine they were serving before. Now, in terms of the underlying message that Jesus is giving to his people, I think that's what he's saying. I think he's saying, hey, you all, you leaders of the church, you people of the covenant, you all are the wedding guests. You've been enjoying the party that's been put on by the Father. You've been enjoying the splendor of the Father's table, the big feast, the party for days. And now the groom has brought you even better wine, and you don't even notice. Shouldn't you be aware enough to notice? I want to be a servant, and I'm afraid that I'm a guest. I'm afraid that I've been enjoying the party that God has been throwing, but I'm in danger of not seeing what is going on behind the scenes. And this means that I might enjoy the wedding, but I won't really know what happened. And I think this can happen to us in the church when we aren't aware of what is going on in the world. I think the temptation for many Christians is to isolate themselves into a Christian bubble. They listen to Christian radio and they watch Christian television and they don't partake in any media or news that isn't from a trusted source that will filter out anything that isn't Christian. And they see this as being faithful. And that would be a great thing to do. It would reduce the temptation. It would keep you on the straight and narrow. Except that that's not what Jesus did. Jesus went where no one else would. He went where the lepers were. He went to Samaria. He went to the tax collector's house. Way too many people keep themselves above the dregs of society. They're too good for that. And so I'm going to stay inside these walls, where it's safe and here. But that's not the life of a servant. The servant has to go out there. They have to be willing to do the dirty work, cleaning out the washing jars so that Jesus can make the water into wine. I want to be a servant. And if I don't hang out with other servants, then I'm more likely to become a guest. And just in case you're afraid that you'll miss out as a servant, 180 gallons of wine means that there was more than enough to go around. And servants are likely to eat last. They're likely to eat the leftovers. But the servants at that wedding, eating the leftovers meant that they got to have the best wine, not the terrible cheap stuff. And even the leftovers are a great feast. These servants ate like kings. And as servants in God's house, we're going to eat like kings too, even as we're offered the leftovers, because God provides in abundance. Now, some of the covenant people were worried that if they included everyone in God's covenant, then they would lose the exclusiveness of being God's chosen people. And I don't understand it, but there are some modern churches that believe that this is true. They claim that only a limited number of people are in the covenant, only their denomination, only their congregation is in, and all others are somehow frauds. But that isn't the message of Jesus. Jesus includes everyone. Jesus gave grace to the covenant people, the insiders. But he also gave grace to the outsiders, the Samaritans, the Gentile woman, the servants, the tax collectors, the unclean, the sick. God's grace is wide. Jesus offers grace to everyone. His love is wide. Jesus gives abundantly, and even the leftovers are a feast. Jesus hangs out with servants and reveals things to them that no one sees. That's where I want to be, with the servants and Jesus. Be a servant. Would you pray with me, please? God, we thank you for the wideness of your mercy, and we thank you for the grace that you give even to the servants. Lord, we pray that you would include us in that mix and to help us to see that that's the place where we want to be. We want to be where the action is. We want to be where you can use us. We want to be where we can listen to your instructions and know what's going on. Lord, help us to step out of our comfort zone. Help us to step outside of these walls and to do your work. In your name we pray.